Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I've got Reed Little back to the channel. How are you, Reed?
Doing good, Peter. Thank you for inviting me. Very happy to be here. How are you?
Fantastic. It is actually the second anniversary of Daydream Nation, so I thought it would be highly appropriate to get you back on the show, considering you were the very first guest all those years ago when we did Never Let Me Down the album. A lot has changed
Yes.
since then, but glad to have you back on the channel. Tonight's show, we are going to talk about classic rock bands that have produced a later day great album. All genres, 3 picks each. Maybe we might throw in a couple of honorable mentions. Reed, what is your first pick for a classic band that has produced a later day great album?
Okay. So, because it's been kind of a tradition to go with David Bowie, and this might be our crossover album, I had to bring up 2016's Black Star from David Bowie. Now, of course, this came out on David Bowie's 69th birthday, 2 days before his death. So there are so many things I love about this album. One, it is a deeply weird album. Right up until his death, David Bowie was a deeply weird man. And if you're a Bowie fan, that is something that you appreciate about him. If you weren't a Bowie fan, it's something that held you at arm's length. But I love that right up until literally the end, he was not afraid to make music that was way out there. Now, he had done The Next Day in 2012, 2013, and it was not exactly a standard album, but still rock. And this time he did an album which was much more of an avant-garde jazz album. He brought in a jazz quartet, Don McCaslin, jazz quartet, I believe. I'm sorry if I got the name wrong. I'm a little muddle-headed right now.
No, you got it right.
On this. So these were just a jazz quartet working around New York City. Even though David was not performing, he was actually so well known in the New York City music scene. There was a joke I read that if your band opened up in New York and David wasn't at your premiere, people worried that something had gone wrong. So David was just known around the clubs in New York, and he had seen Donnie McCaslin play, and it was just this tiny little jazz club that they played at, and they had done some work. David had produced this off-Broadway play Lazarus, which was based on the character that he had played in The Man Who Fell to Earth. David actually owned the rights to that character, and he had produced this very weird little musical vignette, Sue in a Season of Crime, and he had produced this other song based on a 17th century morality play, "'Tis a Pity She's a Whore," which is another song that appeared on the album. You can look all of this history up. Like I said, this album is so unrelentingly weird, which is one of the things that I love about it. One of the songs on it, which is, I believe, Girl Loves Me, which is written partly in the made-up slang from Clockwork Orange and partly in the slang that gay theater guys used in the 1950s. I mean, wow, what a strange thing to have done. And to have it be, at least to my ears, still very entertaining. Now, I think people, the fact that he died immediately after the album came out gave so much weight, so much portent to the music. And I think some of that is very artificial. Now, unquestionably, David knew he was dying. Man had liver cancer. There's no coming back from that. That was a death sentence. He knew he only had a short amount of time, but it wasn't like he had it marked on the calendar. This is it. I've got to get this album out by this date. And in fact, I've read that he was emailing people and telling them there's so much more music that I still have in me that I want to get out. And there was more that he wanted to do. So it's not like he knew this is it. This will be the last thing I ever do. He thought he had more statements to make. It was just that he wasn't able to make those. So there is a bit of baggage that you as the listener bring to it after his death, but that's all part of the post-death art, and part of it that means that this is still an artistic statement that no other artist, I think, is ever going to be able to match. And honestly, I can't think of anybody else who's ever even going to try. A lot of artists looking down the barrel of death just kind of give up, right? I mean, people want to die in dignity. That's a very personal thing. How many people want to turn that into a piece of their own art? And you can't blame them for wanting to make that a very private thing. So David shared his with the world, and what an album we got out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. The only other artist I can think that may have been in that same ballpark, where I think he knew that his death was imminent and created some sort of art reference to it, was probably Johnny Cash with those American recordings, but nothing like this. This is monumental. I think this was David Bowie's last masterpiece. I think it's a beautiful album. It's emotional. It's affecting. Can you imagine? I mean, you've got a death sentence, you've got liver cancer, and you've only got a finite period of time, and it is kind of a race to get your art out, to get as much music. It sort of has all the swings and roundabouts of somebody looking death in the eye, the highs and the lows, the acceptance, the non-acceptance. I just think it's such a powerful work of David Bowie. And for him to not go down the traditional route, Reed, and get the usual David Bowie players and get a jazz quartet. The principle of why he got the jazz quartet was he wanted to get a unit that was already established so he could drive them, approach the material in the way that he wanted, but use their sort of jazz infusion, use their sort of style of music. He didn't want rock musicians playing jazz. He wanted jazz musicians playing the jazz fusion that he had in his head. He was listening to a lot of hip hop as well, so there was a lot of different sort of non-rock influences. I find that the playing on this album is kind of hard. It's free form, it's organic, and there's a lot of urgency in the playing. The band's playing their ass off. I just think it's magnificent. I want to talk about some of the tracks, and feel free, Reed, to interject, because it's a bit of a crossover with our pick.
Yeah.
Black Star. So this song, the opening song, which clicks in at about 10 minutes, and it's really a song of two parts. You could sort of say that this song is about his transition into the afterlife or death, and it's his reflection. And the lyrics that say, something happened on the day he died, spirit rose, a meter then stepped aside. Somebody took his place and bravely cried, I'm a black star, I'm a black star. So he's looking death in the eye, and he's kind of reflecting back on his career. I'm the black star, I'm the black star. What's your take on this song?
I actually have read multiple books on what David Bowie's lyrics might mean. And I think if there's one thing that I took away from all of that, it's that interpreting David Bowie's lyrics too directly is probably the wrong thing to take from it. Because I think Bowie always meant his lyrics very obliquely. In this case, the black star, it's like somehow this image, the black star is his name, right?
Yes.
Which I never figured out.
Neither did I.
Somehow this black star also represents a form of cancer. It's a an image of a tumor, although apparently a tumor mostly found in breast cancer. I didn't really understand that either. So he's got all of these oblique references, and so he passes on, and somebody else takes his place and says, "Now I'm the Black Star."
Yeah.
And why a Black Star? Why not just I'm a star?
Yeah.
I don't know. Certainly David wrote over and over again about the nature of fame, going all the way back to the song Fame, and about how fame sucked and had actually accomplished nothing but ruining his life, and had actually, even though he had pursued it so hard, it had left him broken and penniless.
Yeah.
So
yeah, look, I take your point about his lyrics are oblique, but that's what artistry is all about. It makes it rewarding for the listener to put your interpretations and trying to work out in your head figure out what is he actually saying. I mean, I think we agree. This whole album is about him facing death in the eye and let's make art together. While we're going on this journey, and it's a really brave album in that sense. Lazarus, the song, is another high point for me personally, and it's a song that is both melancholy, but it has these flourishes where, if you watch the film clip, he gets out of bed and he's swinging, and I just found that so kind of emotional, just watching, where he has this burst of energy and he's remembering what it was like. And I like the lyric, "By the time I got to New York, I was living like a king. I used up all my money. I was looking for your ass." And then it goes into another line, "I am free just like that bluebird, just like me." I mean, out of all the songs on this album, this is one where he's facing death in the eye and saying, "I'm ready." And, it's sort of post looking back at his history, but this is where I am now and I'm ready, whatever the journey is.
This is also the one that ties into the story of, now I can't remember the name of the character that he played in The Man Who Fell to Earth, because Lazarus also ties into the story of the man who fell to earth, right? The alien who's been, because Bowie was the man who fell to earth, and it's so meta, because not only was he the man who fell to earth, he was the man who fell to earth. He was stuck here on earth and changed by the act of being stuck on earth and observing culture and unable to get back where he came from, and decided it wasn't worth it anyway. So he produced this play, and oh geez, the whole thing, it's completely mind warping. And then whoever came up with that image of the guy with the buttons on his eyes, oh, that is just one of the creepiest things, is that image from the video of David Bowie with the buttons on his eyes.
Yeah, I watched those videos recently just ahead of this show, and I was just so moved. I was moved at the time. I've seen them subsequent, but just watching it again, really moving. Lazarus, to me, is the emotional heart of this album. It just soars. It builds up and soars, and it's just, if you're not moved by this particular song, well, I don't know, you're not going to be convinced about the rest of it. Another song that I really want to do a shout out, and it sort of speaks to what you said previously about his lyrics being oblique, is "I Can't Give Everything Away." And that sort of directly speaks to what you said previously about, I don't want to, you can interpret me, you can interpret my lyrics, but I'm not going to tell you about everything about me. I am still taking a little bit of mystery even to my grave.
Right.
There's lyrics like "seeing more and feeling less, saying no but meaning yes." It's just sort of maintaining the mystery of Bowie. It's like he's writing his own eulogy. Do you like this song?
I love it. And in fact, I think in some ways I would argue that this, for me, is the emotional heart of the album. I think because Bowie can be cold and disassociative at points. And I think Lazarus, for me, is kind of a cold and disassociative song, perhaps because that character of the man who fell to earth. And I'm going to, after we finish this video, I'm going to remember his name, and it's going to annoy me if I can't remember it while we're taping this. Thomas something, I think. Anyway, I find that character very, because he's meant to be emotionless, that he is at a resolve or a remove from everything. But this is very much Bowie speaking to the experience of the end, and how he's still holding a piece of himself at the end. And this for me is the emotional heart of it.
Yeah, I guess we all see things differently. Did you find that there was a bit of a similarity melody-wise with Never Let Me Down?
I don't know, Peter. I never thought about it. I would have to listen to the two of them.
Yeah, I was listening to this, and then I listened to Never Let Me Down, and it sounded very similar. I think he was harking back to that song. Quite interesting. Brilliant album. I'll put another shout out for Girl Loves Me, and I love that lyric, "Where the fuck did Monday go?"
Yeah.
It's just time is a blur, and you can imagine that everybody in this project is so focused. They're all pulling for David in respect of getting the job done, and time is just sweeping by. So I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's the last great Bowie album, and this is fair and square into the category of a classic artist that has produced a great album. Actually, it's beyond great. It is a masterpiece, and went to #1 in the UK. First US hit of #1. Picked up Grammys and all these awards for, the best album of that particular year, and deservedly so. And it's one album that I constantly go back to, because this is another thing that will come up in our conversation, Reed. Classic artists have put great albums, but do you still go to that album in the record collection, or do you prefer to go back to the earlier material where they may have had the classic era or the great, the hits? This is one where I definitely go back to quite regularly. So there you go.
I agree.
All right. Well, since we shared that first pick, over to you for #2.
Okay. So for #2, and in fact #3, I'm throwing in a bit of a ringer. So because as I was coming through this, I came up with a bit of a different take on this category. So I do in fact have an album, but as I was reviewing this album, I had a thought that we're going to follow this rabbit trail a bit, if you don't mind. So I'm going to start off with this album here, which is Deep Purple's Whoosh, because I really enjoyed this album. But I'm actually not going to talk too much about this album. So this is an album. Because some of these other albums I don't have physical copies of. So Whoosh came out in 2020. See if you know what this has in common with. There's an other album that I really enjoyed, which came out in 2021 from Alice Cooper, called Detroit Stories. Do you know what those two albums had in common?
Bob Ezrin.
Bob Ezrin. In fact, Bob Ezrin started producing albums. Now, of course, with Alice Cooper, he started producing albums way back in 1970 or 71. Some Alice Cooper trivia person will correct me if I'm wrong on that. It was a long time ago. But he recently reconnected with Alice, and he did Paranormal in 2017. And I think that both Paranormal and Detroit Stories are fantastic albums. Not only are the sonics great, the performances are great. Ezrin has songwriting credits on almost every song that's not a cover song. There are a lot of cover songs, well, not a lot, 3 or 4 cover songs on Detroit Stories. And then he's done 3 Deep Purple albums. So starting with in 2013, he did Rapture of the Deep, What's Next, and Whoosh.
Infinite was in there.
Oh, Infinite, right, sorry. So, and again, The sonics on them are great. He gets great performances from the band, and he's got co-writing credits on every track. Now, I don't know how much he's actually contributing to the writing process, because at this stage of their career, Deep Purple is simply doing group writing credits. But he's contributing enough that they simply give Ezrin a co-writing credit. So that is one hell of a late career renaissance. There's 5 albums in 10 years that I think are solid. Now, they may not be your favorite albums from either of those bands. I actually really like Detroit Stories. I think Detroit Stories is the most fun album that Alice Cooper has done in 20 years, at least. But solid playing, like I said, Cooper sounds fantastic. All of the sonic, the guitars sound great. They're not that stupid overcompressed wall of sound. So the guitars sound great, the drums sound great, great performances. And I'm like, Ezrin is, I just wrote this down, Ezrin's 74 years old. So to be putting out this quality of work at 74 is pretty amazing. And I think that's fantastic that he's doing this now, because, in about 1980, now he was putting out massive hits. He was putting out The Wall for Pink Floyd. He was Destroying the Elder for Kiss. He was doing other stuff. He was doing a lot of drugs. And maybe things were not going so great in his life, but here he is now at 74 years old and putting out a phenomenal body of work for multiple musicians. So rather than just doing one album, I'm going to say Bob Ezrin, late in life, is just knocking it out of the park.
Well said. I agree with you, and thank you for bringing that to the table. My actual next pick is actually Deep Purple, because I think their last 2 albums, and I'm not talking about the cover album of Turning to Crime. I'm talking about their last...
because I despise that album.
Yeah. The last 2 studio albums, which was Infinite and Whoosh, were great, or greatish, really, really strong. So I'll talk about Infinite first. That was the 20th album, came out in 2017. The thing that I like about this album is that Deep Purple are allowed to jam. The songs sound really, really loose, and they're allowed to breathe. And a lot of people sort of are starting to put Deep Purple in the category of prog. And I can sort of see that. There's time signature changes and key changes. You compare this era of the band to the Ritchie Blackmore era. Now, the Ritchie Blackmore era of the band was very riff-based. This is very much less riff-based, more about a loose song construction. And I like it. A lot more melody that you'd probably get than the early Deep Purple. Don Airey is definitely more prominent than ever in these albums. Steve Morse, his playing has come back a lot less, more riffage, and Don Airey is sort of taking a lot more of the melodic control. So over this album and the subsequent album, he's definitely right up in the mix. The thing that I like about Deep Purple, this later era, is that Gillan's lyrics are shining. Now, I know that you've always said, Reed, that Gillan's lyrics are hit and miss. When he's on mark, he is a great lyricist, socially observant, witty, but from time to time, he'll do a log in the pocket type of lyric or a Mitzi Dupree, and it's just a throwaway where he, oh shit, I've got to do a lyric, and I've got to put the track down in 5 minutes, and he writes it on a napkin. That's sort of a lyric. But these 2 albums, you can see that his lyrics are quite mature, they're age appropriate, and they're talking about social commentary, political commentary, and where he feels that he is in the world. And let's face it, these guys they're in their 70s. They're not talking about things that they would have talked about in 1972. They're talking about topics like mortality. What's going to be in my future? What's happening to the world? So, like, for example, Infinite, the first album, Time for Bedlam, the opening lyrics, descending the cold steps of the institution for the political insane. And then it gets much more serious, sucking my milk from the venomous tit of the state that's clearly designed to suppress every thought of escape. There's a little bit of anger, a little bit of venom.
Right.
Gillan's right. His writing, his lyrics are very much on form. And I've been reading a lot of kind of critiques, and they're saying, gee, we used to listen to Deep Purple more for the music, but now these later albums, we're actually listening to the lyrics. So I think, Gillan is really shining in this area. Another thing that I want to highlight on this album is that there's a bit of a groove going on. So the songs are allowed to breathe, but they actually groove, and Pacey's drumming, it's much more economical, but the band actually swings. So with Blackmore, it was much more four on the floor, but this band, I think, let's face it, they've been in a combination for a longer duration of time than the Blackmore Mark II era. They're actually in the pocket, but they're actually swinging, and there's a real deep groove. So Infinite, I think it's a great album. All I Got Is You's a great song. Hip Boots, One Night in Vegas, I like that. And then there's a few other, The Surprising and Birds of Prey, I'll do a shout out for that. Now I'll talk about Whoosh. That's the 21st album that came out in 2020. Throw My Bones. The lyrics here, I don't know what lies ahead. It's all a mystery, man. I heard it said, you do your thing, you do your best. I'll take a guess at what happens next. Again, he's just talking about where I am in the world and, my mortality. Next song, Drop the Weapon. No sound of silence, just streets of violence. We're in overload, wrong side of the road. No Need to Shout. That's a great song. It sort of picks up on Deep Purple. It's got that classic groove, a riff. And you listen to the lyrics and it's just really venomous. It's talking about the political leaders of the world at that particular time and how they're just leading everyone down the wrong path. They throw a couple of other instrumentals that are quite nice, Remission Possible, and they go back to the Mark I of And the Address, which is a nice little sort of full circle, turning full circle, because I think everyone was laying down this album was thinking this is probably the last Deep Purple album. So I think that was a nice little way to finish. One more shout out, Man Alive. That's kind of like Ian Gillan's Major Tom. Beautiful opening to the song. It's got the keyboards that sort of soar, and then you've got Morse with these beautiful harmonics. It's one of the best openings of a Deep Purple song you'll ever hear. And if anyone's not moved by that, must be something wrong. I really love this song. And the lyrics are great, and it's just about somebody, Mother Nature prevails, and there's only one. It tells the story of only one man, left on Earth. So it's a bit of a cautionary tale. So last two albums, Infinite and Whoosh, deeply intelligent, age appropriate. Musically, they're at the top of their game. They've got a groove. They're allowing the songs to breathe, and it's a different band. There was more pyrotechnics of Deep Purple Mark II, Mark III. I mean, I personally prefer the earlier Marks, but this band, you just got to treat it as a different band whatsoever. It pays massive rewards, and in my opinion, they're both great albums.
Me too. I hope that they record an album with Simon McBride now that Simon McBride has replaced Steve Morse, because he's a little bit more of that Gary Moore kind of player, and they'll get a little bit more of that blues influence back in, because Morse is a little more proggy. And I'm willing to give them. Well, I'm willing to give Ezrin a mulligan on Turning to Crime because the album's still, the sonics on it are fine, but that is a terrible album.
Yeah.
I mean, covers albums are often terrible, but their choice of material on that album was just crap.
Yeah.
And I would hate for that to be the last thing they put out.
Yeah, I would too. One thing I did forget, and I'll throw to you, Ian Gillan's voice. I actually like, there's a bit of a fragility in his vocals, and he's using a lower pitch, and it's got kind of a warm tone, and it really adds a lot of gravitas to a lot of this material. So you don't hear the Gillan of the 70s, or for that matter, the 80s, where he's doing the, from a whisper to a scream or the high pitch. I kind of like it. What do you think of Gillan's vocals on these albums?
I think he sounds amazing. In fact, that's one thing that I think both the Deep Purple and the Alice Cooper have in common. For guys in their 70s, they sound fantastic. No, I was going to compare them to somebody that I think doesn't sound fantastic, but I'm going to leave that alone. No, I think he sounds great. Not everybody sounds great at that age, but I think those guys sound great.
Yeah. Well, I've seen some YouTube of Deep Purple with McBride, and unfortunately Gillan's upper register seems to be a little bit shot. So, but it's of that age. But when he's doing this material and it's at that lower vocal range, it's much more successful, and it's just really suits the material. So, all right. Well, there we go. We've 2 picks down, and we've kind of gone on a very similar path. I'm really intrigued about your third one. I'm not sure that you're going to pick my third one, but you never know. So what is it?
I bet there's going to be some crossover, but not necessarily in the way that you're expecting. Okay, so going off of the idea of a producer now, I decided to go, I wanted to throw in a 2023 album. So because I want to support new music. One of the artists that I've been getting more into in recent years is one Sir Ignatius Papadopoulos. That, of course, isn't his name. It's Iggy Pop. So this year he came out with this album called Every Loser. Now, this is kind of my counterexample to my previous examples with Bob Ezrin. And I'm bringing this up for a purpose. There's another member, probably anybody who's watching Peter's channel knows I'm often on this other channel called the Contrarians. One of the fellow Contrarians likes to talk about bands that are trying to sound like themselves. And while that often annoys me, sometimes he's right. And where I think people can get into the habit of trying to sound like themselves is when they turn creative control over to someone else. And of course, Iggy Pop, for his entire career, has always relied on collaborators. He's never been a sole artist, right? He's never been the primary creative guy. So in 2023, he comes out with this album, Every Loser. And he's collaborating with this, to me, I'm calling him a kid because he's 30 years old, but this guy who is suddenly popping up everywhere, collaborating with legacy artists, Andrew Watt. And Andrew Watt is the guy that you go to now when you want to sound like yourself. Sometimes with better success and sometimes with less. Now, because Iggy relies on collaborators, he did an album with Josh. Is it Homme? You know what? I don't even know. He does an album with the guy from Queens of the Stone Age. It sounds like Queens of the Stone Age with Iggy Pop singing. It's okay.
Yeah, I didn't like that.
If you like Queens of the Stone Age, it's okay. It's not my favorite Iggy Pop album. But most Iggy Pop, there's usually one or two songs I really like, and the rest of it, it's all right. Not surprisingly, my favorite Iggy Pop albums are the ones that David Bowie produced for him, because they sound like David Bowie albums that happen to have Iggy Pop singing, right? Well, this album has one of my all-time favorite Iggy Pop songs on it, Strung Out Johnny. That is, to me, that is an Iggy Pop masterpiece. It's one of the best things that I think Iggy Pop has ever recorded. I can just listen to that song over and over and over again. That song by itself, I'm like, wow, that's a fantastic song. And it is enough to elevate this album for me into the, yeah, I listened to this album now in preference to some other Iggy Pop albums. And I don't dislike the other songs on it, but it is definitely, Andrew Watt was trying to sound like Iggy Pop on this album. So how do I feel about that? I don't know. I honestly do not know. But I do know that on at least one track, he hit it out of the park. And you know what? Sometimes that's all it takes. If an album is good and then it has one song that's outstanding, sometimes that's all it takes. That if you're in the mood for that artist, you're like, yes. If I'm in the mood for that artist and I know that this album has that one song that just hits that spot, then I will go for that one song, and the rest of it is fine. But
yeah,
if I'm going to be just listening to music, and I rarely just listen, I'm a video gamer. So if I'm playing video games and I've got music on in the background, that's fine. But if I'm like listening to music as my sole form of entertainment, I'm going to put on The Idiot or something that I can just focus on and spend a lot more time with concentrating on.
Yeah. Well, Andrew Watt is definitely the man of the moment with Hackney Diamonds. And I did a recent show with Joe B. And just, I think I came to the conclusion that there were 12 tracks and 6 of the songs were stone cold great songs. 3 were definitely let down by the production because he's gone for a very much a modern production, which kind of spoiled it for me. And the rest of it was not so good. However, Patient Number 9 was my album of the year. And I really thought that was an outstanding album. And I've done it on a Rock Daydream Nation. I didn't bring to the table today because I've spoken about it before. But what he did with Ozzy in that album was create a 70s AM rock radio album. And it was all the music that Ozzy loves because Ozzy has always professed his love for the Beatles and ELO and 70s AM radio, not just heavy metal, and that was the perfect album for it. Again, a lot of folk didn't like it, but I liked it. But Andrew Watt is definitely a hot thing at the moment, and he can seem to tap into the psyche of that particular artist and what they desire. So I have not heard the Iggy Pop album, and I will definitely I will seek it out. All right, thank you for that. All right. Well, I'm going to go to another heritage artist, and, you know, there can't be anybody bigger on the planet than the Beatles or, for that matter, Paul McCartney. And I'm going to go for the 2020 release of McCartney 3. So there he is, the man himself. This album was released in the middle of COVID. It's a COVID album. So McCartney was in his studio in Sussex and laid down all the tracks and basically, save for a couple of tracks, recorded it all himself. He played the drums, he played the guitar, the bass. He did the whole thing. I think it's an outstanding album. And I think McCartney's in an interesting space in his career where he's a billionaire. His discography is huge. And he's got to a point in his life that he is still creating art. He's still being experimental and not necessarily looking for hits. He's just being creative and inquisitive and just putting stuff out there. In respect to this album, I think it's great because the songwriting, the creativity, is just immense. The first track on the album is called Long-Tailed Winter, and it's an instrumental. And it's kind of like he plays this acoustic guitar, and it's kind of swampy and folky. It goes for 5 minutes, but it's really compelling, and it brings you into the whole album. Originally, it was music that he was going to do for a film, but he extended it out, and that was basically the start of this whole project. And then he goes into all these various other songs. Find My Way is another outstanding song. It's catchy. One thing you do notice about McCartney through this album vocally, like a lot of the artists of that vintage, his vocals are kind of, there's a fragility about it. You know, he's a bit shaky, especially on certain registers, but it sort of gives a lot of weight to the material because he's talking about stuff that's age appropriate. And like I was saying about, Deep Purple with Gillan, he's just talking observational stuff, things that mean a lot to him and he wants to share with the world. And it just, adds a lot of emotion to the whole proceedings. So Find My Way is great. Women and Wives, he comes out of the bag with a great lyric which talks about the complexities of relationships, the human condition, and just the relationships between men and women. There's a song that I really like on here, and pardon, it doesn't sound like a great song by the title. It's called Lavatory Lil. It could be on Let It Be. It's a nice little rocker. It's like a garage style, and he's playing all the instruments. It's really, really good. Seize the Day sounds very Beatlesque. It's got that descending bass line, recorded or sounds from the Magical Mystery Tour era of 1967. It's got a warm, nostalgic feel about it. Another outstanding track is When Winter Comes, where it finishes off the whole album, and it's just simply his voice and the acoustic guitar. So there's other tracks, but he's in lockdown, it's COVID, and he's producing great art out of adversity, and putting something that just sounds so positive, so inventive, and like he's 80 years old and he's still putting out some great material, and he's still touring the world, Reed. I mean, he just did a tour in Australia, and he was interviewed, do you want to retire? And he goes, no, this is what I do. I play. So he's one of those artists like the Rolling Stones. They'll just keep going because that's what they do. No retirement for them. And good on them. It's a big tick. And if the people still want to see them and play their, buy their music, well, they'll still keep on going and putting out material. But to me, this is still a great album, and it's an example of a heritage artist that is still putting outstanding material. So that's it, McCartney 3. Check it out. There you are. Any honorable mentions?
Well, I was going to talk about Who, the album by The Who, but I didn't really get a chance to re-listen to it enough to talk intelligently enough about it. But it would be my honorable mention in that it has the most rockin' song that Pete Townsend has written in 20 years, even if it's somewhat of a strange political number about Guantanamo Bay. Now, mind you, not that it's, I don't want to get too political, so I won't make a statement about Guantanamo Bay itself other than just to point out that the timing on it is rather weird. Not that Guantanamo Bay and the detainees in Guantanamo Bay are still there, but they haven't been a part of the American news cycle for such a long time that when The Who came out with a song about them, I was like, that's an interesting choice, Pete. That's interesting timing. But the album is not fantastic from start to finish. It's got some good songs on it, though. It rocks harder than a 77-year-old man has any right to rock. And I thought it was vastly better than Endless Wire, which I thought was crap. But as counterpoint, our friend Martin Popoff thinks Endless Wire is a masterpiece and he hates Who. So swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, it is. I guess my honourable mention would be Iron Maiden and would be Book of Souls. Sprawling epic, very proggy. A lot of the songs go on for like average 7 to 8 minutes. A lot of the songs are allowed to breathe, but always kind of compelling, and it's wonderfully creative. And I think that comes into the category of a great later piece album, and I'll be interested to see what their next album is going to be like. So there you go.
New Bruce Dickinson solo album started 2024. So excited.
Thank you, Reed. As always, thank you for being today's guest. This was a really fun chat covering later great album or greatish albums by Heritage Acts. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Click the bell and put your comments as to what albums that you think are, sort of greatish by Heritage or classic acts that the viewers should check out. One thing's for certain, Reed and I will be doing plenty of shows on Rock Daydream Nation in the future. Just check it out. All coming soon. See you later.
Cheers, Peter.
Bye.